Evil Pixel.
Rare is one of the most well-known developers of all time. And rightfully so, they've created some of the most influential games of all time over and over again. Now we're talking about the Donkey Kong Country series, 007 GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie. The list is pretty much endless. And as discussed in this channel previously, there are quite a few games by Rare that have been cancelled and shelved without ever being spoken about again. And so in today's video, we're going to be talking about a little character that has been hiding in broad daylight, so to speak. And more specifically, recent information regarding a dedicated video game of this character, known as Timber, with what fans have labeled as Timber 64. Now to begin, Timber cannot be discussed without first mentioning Diddy Kong Racing for the Nintendo 64. This is the character select screen for Diddy Kong Racing. Spot anything interesting? Well, as you may have noticed from the thumbnail of this video, this small tiger on the bottom right of the screen is Timber the Tiger. In fact, for those who were not aware, a few fan favorite Rare protagonists got their start in Diddy Kong Racing, such as Banjo and Conker. In fact, there was a rumor floating around that every character from Diddy Kong Racing was going to have a game centered around them eventually. If that's not enough to shock you, then what about the fact that Diddy Kong Racing didn't initially include or even involve Diddy Kong at all? In fact, Diddy Kong Racing started as an RTS real-time strategy game by Rare employees Chris Stamford, Lee Musgrave, Rob Harrison, and Lee Schumann. This RTS game was centered around a time-traveling caveman. It wasn't long before the dev team realized that this game just wasn't going to appeal to most gamers. They then decided to ditch the idea of an RTS game in favor of a racing game they had in mind, all while keeping the assets used in the RTS game they were initially developing. Given that the game was turning into a racing game, the team tinkered around with some title and premise ideas. They drew several ideas from the concept surrounding Disney World and ended up calling the project Wild Cartoon Kingdom, which had a hub world linking museum parks to one another, similar to Disney World. Now in 2018, Lee Schumann, the director of the project, did an interview with UK magazine Games TM and showed off some never before seen concept art of a donkey and crab, which were intended to be playable in the Wild Cartoon Kingdom game. Now unfortunately, neither of them made it past conceptualization, which is a shame because these characters look really cool and they have that Rare look and feel to them. Now as the game progressed, they decided that the name Wild Cartoon Kingdom wasn't going to cut it for their game. They then chose to change the game's title to Pro-Am 64. Now if you know anything about retro gaming, you most likely know about the RC Pro-Am games that came out for the NES. In fact, the sequel, RC Pro-Am 2, is among one of the more rare and sought after games for the NES. But what most people don't know is that Rare developed the RC Pro-Am series for the NES and Game Boy. So they decided to renew and rebrand the series with this new project and call it Pro-Am 64. It was also during this time that the team decided to choose a mascot for the game, to which they decided on Timber the Tiger, who was a playable character in the retail version of Diddy Kong Racing. Rare designer Martin Wakely stated in an interview that he did in fact own a nylon polo shirt with the Pro-Am 64 logo on it made by Rare. The photo of the shirt was then shared by Rare's Twitter account, and as you can see, the logo clearly shows Timber being the front face of the game. Now for those who can recall, RC Pro-Am consisted of RC cars racing on a racetrack. However, Rare wanted their new game to involve three-wheeled trikes instead of standard cars. This was confirmed in the same article written in the UK magazine Games TM, where a woolly mammoth was shown. It was revealed that the mammoth was part of the development since its RTS days, but unfortunately didn't make the final cut. He can also be seen riding one of said three-wheeled trikes, as described earlier. Now, it was at this time that their game began getting more and more attention at Rare, and soon garnered enough interest that an entire team got on board to make a build of the game. At the time, there were no other games like it, a racing game with adventure aspects to it. The game was setting out to be a hit, and the people at Rare knew it. Now the story goes that at E3 1997, the team at Rare presented Shigeru Miyamoto with a prototype of Pro M64, a playable build. After experiencing Rare's project, he became interested in what they were doing. He then offered them the character of Diddy Kong to be featured in the game to give the game a bit more appeal. The team at Rare knew that with Nintendo backing them and the likelihood of Diddy Kong as the front face, the game was sure to be a hit. And so they agreed with Miyamoto's offer. And so Pro M64 had to be reworked to include Diddy Kong. And it was then that Timber the Tiger had to take a back seat to the spotlight. The director of the project, Lee Shunman, in an interview for Games TM magazine, stated that the team had a ton of freedom with the game, which he accounts to a majority of the game's success. He continued by stating that Nintendo didn't really bother them with what the game should be, and it's something that doesn't really happen anymore in the video game industry. They were able to make the game that they wanted to make. But what happened to Timber the Tiger? Well, they kept him in the game, as many may know, but other elements regarding his presence as the lead role remained. One thing that gamers seem to forget is that Diddy Kong Racing takes place on Timber's homeland, Timber Island. In fact, the plot of the game somewhat revolves around Timber even with all the changes. Timber's parents go on vacation and they leave their son in charge of the island. Timber and his friends then organize a big race. The antagonist, Wizpig, then shows up threatening to conquer the island. And that sets the stage for Diddy Kong Racing. Now back to the very beginning of the video when I mentioned Timber 64. Well, it was a huge rumor back in the day that there was another project other than Diddy Kong Racing being developed featuring Timber the Tiger. There was a rumor going around back when the information regarding the early development of Diddy Kong Racing was brought to light. And that is that Timber was to star in his own adventure game. And I'm not talking about Pro M64, but rather a dedicated adventure game featuring Timber. However, in an interview by Not Enough Shaders with developer Martin Wakely and Lee Musgrave, the two Rare employees were asked, quote, "There was a rumor that Timber 64 was a game where it was developing during the Nintendo 64 days. Basically, the rumor was Timber from Diddy Kong Racing would get his own game, just like Banjo and Conker did. Pipsy and Bumper would co-star in Timber 64. Can you or Lee provide any details on this rumor? It's interesting because Diddy Kong Racing takes place on Timber Island, so it seemed that Rare really liked the Timber character." To which Martin Wakely said, "I couldn't say for definite, but I have no recollection of that ever being in development. Where the rumor may have started is that an early version of Diddy Kong Racing, I think it was called RC Pro-Am at the time, had Timber as the lead character. I'm sure I've got a badly fitted nylon polo shirt with the game's logo on it somewhere." Lee Musgrave added, "There was never a Timber 64 game. Yes, there was a Pro-Am 64 that had Timber as the main character, but that became Diddy Kong Racing, and that was the end of that." So you see, it was because of this interview that threw any rumors of Timber having his own adventure game out of speculation. It debunked the rumor completely, and people just kind of forgot about it. That is until February of 2021 this year. In an interview with Kevin Bayless for the site Video Game Chronicles. It all started when the beta build of Dinosaur Planet was leaked online back of February 20th of 2021. And as some of you may know, Dinosaur Planet was a Rare game that is originally what Star Fox Adventure was supposed to be before Miyamoto also suggested the use of one of his Nintendo characters. I've actually covered it in this channel in the past, so if you're interested, just click on the top right and I'll also leave a link in the description below. The build of Dinosaur Planet was thought to be lost or locked away in Rare's vault, but apparently it hit a soft spot within several developers and made them go on memorable nostalgia trips, as many expressed their thoughts on Dinosaur Planet. This included Kevin Bayless, and what he said in his interview. He stated, "After finishing work on Diddy Kong Racing in 1998, I started work on a project that was to become a 3D adventure game based in a fantasy-style world, similar to that of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, but in a prehistoric environment. The main character was originally going to be, believe it or not, Timber, the cute tiger from Diddy Kong Racing. That's because he was intended to be the star of the previous year's racing game when it was originally known as RC Pro-Am 64. Now, he also mentioned Timber's involvement in Dinosaur Planet in the same interview. He continued by saying, "In Dinosaur Planet, Timber was going to be a time-traveling tiger with a rucksack, little fingerless gloves, a baseball cap, and a small dinosaur for a sidekick. Actually, I even tried out Timber in a project prior to Diddy Kong Racing, where he walked around on all fours like a real tiger cub. It was an early 3D platforming test, and I wanted him to use his claws to scale walls. But this project was abandoned, so he was moved into Diddy Kong Racing, and that's as far as his career went. Now, if only someone could dig up that really old demo with Timber in his rucksack." This interview confirms from the developer himself that a Timber 64 was in fact real at some point, and there is a demo out there somewhere. And it also hints at Pro-Am 64's tie-in with Dinosaur Planet, which would explain characters like Smokey the Dragon and Tricky the Triceratops. But the question still remains, why did other Rare developers deny, or better yet just not recall, a Timber game in the works? And I believe I may have the answer. And I have to give credit to my friend Monokoma of Unseen64 for finding an interview by Nintendo Life back in January of 2021, where designer Steve Males of Rare gave an insight on Rare processes and procedures. He stated, "Rare was famously secretive, and that includes other games being made in the company. Many people on the team wouldn't even have seen much of Donkey Kong 64 and Conquer. Rare's practice of separating teams across its infamous barns naturally created some competition. I'm not really sure why we thought about it at the time. In those days, each team worked in relative isolation and competed against each other to develop the best games. A healthy rivalry, if you like. I do remember that we changed Donkey Kong to be more of a proper 3D game similar to Mario 64, after seeing the work that the Conquer teams were doing. And so, I believe that the reason why Martin Wakely and Les Musgrave denied the existence of a Timber game is simply because they weren't part of that particular team and were kept away from its development process. Now, with Kevin Bayless admitting that there was in fact a demo out there of this Timber 64 game, there's still hope that someday someone, somewhere, may decide to reveal it to everyone, with perhaps other information we haven't mentioned. Because there is a bit of an untold rumor going on, as mentioned previously, about every character from the original Pro-Am 64 game who were supposed to get their own game. As we all know, Banjo and Conker got their turn and saw great success, Timber almost did as well, but what about the others like Drumstick, Bumper, Tip Top, and Pipsy? Now, of course, there's also a few things I haven't mentioned in this video, such as the small changes that came with the changes from Pro-Am 64 to Diddy Kong Racing. But several of them were just music, timing in the cutscenes, and of course your typical HUD changes. I've been showing videos of it in the background if anyone is interested, and I'll have a link for everything in the description below. But unfortunately, that is what we know of Timber 64. Thank you guys for watching. We recently started streaming on Twitch, so be sure to check us out there if you'd like, as well as check out our Discord to see if you want to discuss any unreleased games from the past. And I'll catch you all next time.